This is our proposed exercise, a pin joint structure or truss, in which we have a fixed support at point A, which will give us a vertical reaction as well as a horizontal one, and a roller support at point I, which will give us a vertical reaction. Our objective here is to compute the displacements at 2 points. For that purpose, we will need to compute the internal forces of all the bars in this system as well as in others that I will present later. In order to do this, we will need to compute the reactions. So let's go with that. We set up our equations. Sum of all vertical forces equal to 0, the sum of all horizontal forces equal to 0, and the sum of all moments at a certain point, in this case A, equal to 0. We develop those equations. Here we have taken as positive those forces that create a moment that rotates in this direction, around A. Just to clarify that. Okay, let's get the 3 unknowns from this system. First, we clear up the equations. And now we can get, for example, from here, the vertical reaction at point I. Here we can get the horizontal reaction at point A. And finally here we can get the vertical reaction at point A. With this, we can now try to compute the internal forces. However, we need the angles of the geometry, of the structure. Some of them are rather straightforward. This is 90, this is 45. What's this one? Same. Yet again 45 and 90. There. However, and this, and this, and this, and this are clearly 90, but these angles are not as clearly defined, so we'll need to compute them. This is point G, this is point F, this is point C, and this is point D. Yeah. But let's call this angle alpha. Then this will be 90 minus alpha. This will be alpha, and this will be 90 minus alpha yet again. This is L, and this is half of L. Thanks to trigonometric relations, we know that the tangent of alpha is equal to half of L divided by L. This allows us to compute alpha. And obviously 90 minus alpha. Let's call this beta, then this will be 90 minus beta, then beta, 90 minus beta again. The procedure is the same. Tangent is equal to half of L divided by L. It actually gives us the same value. Beta will be this, and 90 minus beta will be this. We can now go ahead and try to compute the internal forces. We will look at nodes where we only have two unknowns. For example, in A, we have the internal force of bar AE and internal force of bar AB. So we can start with node A. We will always define the internal forces as going out of the node. Just to be clear. Then, when we have computed these two internal forces, we will then get their equivalents for nodes E and B. Let's get to it. The procedure is rather simple. We just have to set up two equations, one in which all vertical forces are equal to 0, and another one in which all horizontal forces are equal to 0. With this, we can solve this little problem and get the internal forces. Now, if you want to point to node E, we would have three unknowns for this, and this bar. So, and the same would be true for bar B, for point B. We have three unknowns. So we will need to look for a point in which we have only two unknowns, or two internal forces. G is such a point, for example. So let's go into point G. This is rather simple. Now, thanks to having attained this internal force, we have reduced the number of unknowns in point F by 1. That's how we can proceed. We take those points that we can solve, and that will allow us to solve other points. Now I will compute the rest of the internal forces, following the exact same procedure. Now, this equation has no unknowns, as this internal force, and this internal force have all been computed beforehand. We cannot get anything from here. We have to get our last unknown from this other equation. Our first objective is to compute the vertical displacement in point H. In order to do this, we have designed a system in which we have no external loads apart from this unit load in point H. The geometry is the same, so are the angles, and we'll have the same number of reactions while they will have different values. I have already computed them here. The procedure is the same as before, only with the new system. Vertical force is equal to 0, horizontal force is equal to 0, and moments at a certain point equal to 0 we'll have chosen, as well as we did before, point A. This is a very simple computation which leads to these results which give us the reactions of this new system. Now that we have all the reactions, we can start computing these systems internal forces. Let's start with node A. Our second objective is to compute the horizontal displacement at point G. For that purpose, the same as before, we have designed a system that lacks any external forces except for a point load of value 1 Newton at point G. Now, we will be able to compute the displacement thanks to the internal forces of each bar. So we have to compute them. We start, as we've done before, with computing the reactions, which we have set up the same way as before. We have the sum of vertical forces equal to 0, the sum of horizontal forces equal to 0, and the sum of all moments at a certain point, which we have chosen A4, equal to 0. Let's do the computation. Now that we have this information, we can begin to compute the internal forces of the bars. With all the data that we've obtained from the previous steps, we can fill this table, which I've done out of camera as it doesn't really need any explanation. These computations are then added up, and this result divided by E times the area gives us the vertical displacement at point H, as well as then using these computations the horizontal reaction at point G, thus solving the exercise completely.